In the world of interactive storytelling, visual novels stand out as a unique medium that blends narrative and visual elements to immerse players in its intricate worlds. While many visual novels explore themes of romance, mystery, and fantasy, there exists a subset of this genre that delves into darker and more unsettling topics, pushing the boundaries of storytelling in ways that can be profoundly disturbing. These narratives are often characterized by their intricate plot twists, psychological horror, and morally charged scenarios that linger in the minds of players long after the screen goes dark. Now, with the over-pretentious intro aside, I want to welcome you guys to the disturbing visual novel Iceberg, made by the user Necessary Paul on Reddit. Shout out to him. Also, before we get started, I want to say that I've changed the order of some entries, and I've thrown in some extra VNs toward the end. This video is going to be really long, so I won't be wasting any more of your time. Now, without further ado, let's get started. Steins Gate is a science fiction visual novel that was released in Japan for the Xbox 360 on October 2009. The game was later ported to Windows on August 2010 and later on other platforms. Despite being released initially on a console that sold very poorly in Japan and having no adult content, Steins Gate somehow managed to succeed against all the odds and become one of the most iconic VNs of all time. The story takes place in Akihabara in 2010. It follows the story of the self-proclaimed mad scientist Rintaro Okabe, who alongside his friends Mayura Shina and Aitaro Hashida discover that they have accidentally created a machine capable of sending messages to the past. Highly recommend this one to any beginners who want to get a taste for a visual novel without any gameplay, and while it starts slow initially, once the story gains momentum, you won't be dropping this amazing work full of great writing and shocking twists. The only negative I could give is that the phone mechanics are kinda annoying, but honestly, if you haven't read this one or watched the anime yet, then you probably have no right to call yourself a fan of visual novels. Zero Escape is a series of adventure video games developed by Spike Chunsoft. The series features 3 titles, 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors, as well as Virtuous Last Reward and finally Zero Time Dilemma. While calling these games visual novels is a bit of a stretch, with it being mostly a puzzle game, you will still be reading a lot of text. The first game has this charming 2D pixelated art style, while the 2 others have this 3D, albeit kind of janky look. The thing these games mostly succeed in is delivering mind-blowing plot twists that recontextualize your entire experience, but you need to get every ending to get the full picture. This series was the reason I got into visual novels as a teen, so I really think fondly of them. The first one is still my favorite. Fate's Stay Night is a Japanese visual novel game developed by Type Moon and originally released as an adult game for the Windows on January 2004. It's kind of ridiculous that an eroge would become the cornerstone for one of the biggest Japanese media franchises that prints money, but here we are. The story revolves around Shiro Imiya, a hard-working and honest teenager who unwillingly enters the death tournament called the Fifth Holy Grail War, where combatants fight with magic and heroes from throughout history for a chance to have their wishes granted by the powerful Holy Grail. Fate's Stay Night is a masterpiece that makes great use of the route structure, with each route building upon the former and adding to the overall character and thematic points that it wants to make. I personally love everything about this VN, from the overcomplicated world building to the interesting monologues. After the massive success of this VN, it would get a re-release called Realta Nua that added voice acting, and Thanos snapped all the H scenes from existence. Personally, the Fate route is definitely my favorite, and I'm still waiting for it to get the Ufotable treatment. Danganronpa is a Japanese video game franchise created by Kazutaka Kodaka and developed and owned by Spike Chunsoft. The series primarily surrounds various groups of apparent high school students who are forced into murdering each other by a robotic teddy bear named Monokuma. Over the years, the Danganronpa series became pretty extensive, not only with video games of a few different genres, but also with anime and even novels composing the franchise. And the fanbase for this franchise is so massive, and I can see why, with it having excellent sound and visual design, as well as great casts and decent world building. I won't be spoiling anything, but the plot twist near the end of Danganronpa V3 has to be one of the craziest plot twists I've ever seen in a fictional story. Doki Doki Literature Club is a 2017 freeware visual novel developed by the independent game studio Team Salvato for the Windows. The game was initially distributed through itch.io, then later became available on Steam. Unlike most entries on this Iceberg, this one was actually developed by a Western developer. Before reading this VN, the big plot twist was sadly lost for me because I got spoiled like a million times by those Let's Play channels around 2017. The story is told from the perspective of a high school student who reluctantly joins the school's literature club on the insistence of his childhood best friend, and is given the option to romantically pursue 3 of its 4 female members. Personally, I think the game is really overrated, with most of the girls being anime stereotypes and a lot of the disturbing scenes being only there for shock value. I have to say though that the part where the game starts to mess with your files was actually really cool. Love Alternative is a sequel to the first Love game, which takes place after the events of Unlimited. Unlike the first game, which was your run-of-the-mill Moege, the sequel is set in an alternative sci-fi timeline, where humanity was invaded by aliens. I played this VN with low expectations because I don't really care about mecha-type visual novels, but in the end I found it pretty good. I mean, sure, it gets boring and pretty long, but the thing is, afterwards it gives you an amazing scenario that neutralizes all the boring parts. Overall, an awesome VN that has some bad points, like the pacing, but I suggest everyone give this one a read. Chaos Head is a 2008 science fiction visual novel video game developed by Nitro Plus. It is the first game in the science adventure series following the original Windows release. An enhanced version called Chaos Head Noah was released for the Xbox 360 in 2009 and has since been ported to multiple platforms. The story is set in Shibuya, Tokyo, and follows Takumi Nishijo, a high school student who develops paranoia and delusions after having witnessed a series of murders. After that, he meets several girls who have an interest in him, but he suspects that one of them might have a connection to the murders. Despite all the praise this VN gets, I just couldn't get past the 5-hour mark because of the obnoxious protagonist and the abysmal pacing. I will pick it up again in the future, but at the moment I have no interest in continuing it. Totano, officially localized as You and Me and Her, A Love Story, is a Japanese visual novel developed by Nitro Plus for the Windows. It was released on June 2013. This game was the first VN to do the whole crazy girl abducts protagonist and modifies files of the game thing 4 years before Doki Doki Literature Club. And while the developer of Doki Doki denies any resemblance, the similarities here just speak for themselves. If you ask me, Totano is much better. The cast here is smaller, and therefore they have more time to develop in the 15 hours runtime, and the story events feel way more satisfying than the DLC. I highly suggest this one, and if you ever pick up this VN, then make sure to keep the manual file around because you will need it, trust me. Higurashi When They Cry is a mystery thriller visual novel set in the remote village of Hinamizawa. The protagonist, Keiichi, is a newcomer to the village but has already made a tight-knit group of friends and thoroughly enjoys his life there. But when he finds out about an unresolved murder incident from 5 years ago and the mysterious phenomena surrounding it, everything he knows about his friends and the village is turned upside down. Higurashi is divided into 8 main story arcs, and it's the first story in the When They Cry franchise. Higurashi is one of those VNs that take a little time to really set off. It takes a little patience to get through the first few hours, but when the story takes shape, you are in for a ride. If you're gonna pick this VN, then uninstall the 7th expansion mod, because it will add 2D backgrounds and some great looking character sprites. Rance is a role-playing video game series created, developed and published by Alicesoft. It is their longest-running erotic video game series in history, with nearly 30 years between the first game and the conclusion of the series. The first installment, Rance: The Quest for Hikari, was released in 1989, while the last main series game, Rance X Showdown, was released in 2018. This game has a huge following, and I can see why, with it having massive amounts of scripts and absurd levels of world building. Personally, I have no experience with the series, even though a lot of friends keep recommending it. From what I've seen researching for this entry, the game features heavy amounts of sexual assault that's played as jokes, and a lot of disturbing scenes, like a scene where a pregnant woman's stomach is ripped off and the fetus within is eaten, and another where a monster beats and violates some dead bodies. I don't have a lot to add, so here's this fun fact about the protagonist. Did you know that the Japanese H-game magazine, Techigian, had a ranking to let the readers vote for their favorite H-game character? But for a long time, Rance held the first place. Then Techigian changed the ranking to your favorite H-game heroine, disqualifying Rance since the original intention of the poll was to rank girls. Satsukoi is a visual novel developed by Alcott Honeycomb and released on August 2014. The story follows Kano Izumi, who finds himself injured and tossed out on the streets in the middle of the winter after an argument with his adoptive father turned sour. With nowhere to go, he lies dying on the snow in front of the station. But there he meets a strange young girl, Yu, whom claims to take ownership of him and allows Izumi to live with her under the condition that she'll be able to eat him at some point in the future. If you're looking for a plot-heavy game that's on the shorter side of things and has bittersweet endings, then this is the perfect game for you. The darker portrayal of mermaids was an interesting touch, and the scenes of cannibalism were disturbing. Also, there's plenty of action and mystery to keep you on your toes throughout this game. We Without Wings, Taglined Under the Innocent Sky is the 5th visual novel developed by Naval and released on January 2009. Before the game's release, a prequel game named Prelude, containing bonus scenarios and events before the timeline of the game, was released on June 2008. Unlike the previous entries, this one is more of a psychological thriller that deals with the protagonist having multiple personalities, and each of the identities taking over depending on the route. This game is decent throughout and gives a great finale in the after story, with many of the questions from the main game answered. To be perfectly honest, the romance seemed a bit choppy and poorly done, but the concept of the protagonists more than make up for it. There isn't a lot of info about this VN, outside of some reviews, and sadly it has no English patch. Iceberg is a 3D adventure eroge RPG released in 2015 by Alisoft. It is also notable for being drawn by Naniagashi, the character designer of Senran Kagura. It was translated by Manga Gamer for a 2018 release and was released on Steam in October that same year. Iceberg is set in a world created by the Holy Mother Eve. The world of Eve is governed by commandments which are enforced by the world. Breaking those commandments results in a permanent curse to become an outlaw, rejected by the world and by society. Seth's video about this game is hilarious and I recommend you check it out. What also helps is the fact that there is way less messed up stuff in this game than in Rants, with the exception of some scenes that are freaky, like this one described by Seth as 3 monster sausages being shoved into the 3 holes of a bowling ball. If you get what I mean, then the bowling ball gets mutilated and eaten by those monsters. Very wholesome. Wonderful Everyday or Subahebi is a Japanese visual novel developed by Kirokyu. It was released for the Windows in 2010 and was given an international release by Frontwing in 2017. It is Kirokyu's 4th game and it's an expanded retelling of Tsui no Sora, and it shares many characters and plot elements with it. The story follows a group of several Tokyo High School students, mostly through July of 2012, and each chapter is told from the perspective of one of its 5 main characters. Because of the same time coverage, certain events are overlapping from chapter to chapter, but at the core of it all is a mystery revolving around the prophecy about the end of the world on July the 20th. The plot structure resembles that of Alice in Wonderland, with you falling deeper and deeper with every chapter, discovering more about the mysteries this story holds. Now, this is where these visual novels start to get really disturbing. This one has damn near every single horrible thing you could think of. In fact, this VN is so disturbing that the people behind the Steam version went and removed 90% of the game, just so they can get it released on the store. And even if you get the full patch, it will still lack some scenes, like this scene featuring a girl and a dog. I'll let you fill in the gaps. But beyond all these things, the story is a beautiful tale about standing up for yourself and facing the hardships of life head on. I'm halfway through this one and it's great. Saya no Uta, or Song of Saya, is a Lovecraftian horror visual novel developed by Nitroplans and released on 2009. The original plot is written by Gen Urobuchi, also known as Urobucher, because of his signature writing style that revolves around killing as much characters as possible and having very disturbing themes. And this is reflected in Saya no Uta, where it features cannibalism, pedophilia and rape, and heavy amounts of gore. In fact, it's so gory that even the backgrounds mostly consist of blood and flesh. The story follows Fuminori, who is a young medical student whose life completely changes when he is involved in a car accident alongside his parents, killing them and heavily wounding him. He undergoes an experimental brain surgery that saves his life, but leaves him with an exaggerated form of agnosia that causes him to see the world around him covered in gore and the people as hideous monsters. As he contemplates suicide in the hospital, he is approached by a beautiful young girl named Saya, who he sees as a human but in reality is a terrified monster from another dimension, whose appearance drives people mad. Due to their circumstances, Fuminori and Saya become close and move in together, eventually becoming lovers and incredibly dependent on one another. Beyond all the shocking content, this is by far one of the most unique and atmospheric visual novels I have ever read, and I recommend it to anyone who can stomach it. Full Metal Demon Muramasa is a Japanese visual novel developed and published by Nitro Plus for the Windows. It was released in Japan on October 2009. An English localization was by Just USA and was released on August 2021. The game is regarded as a masterpiece in the visual novel community, and I can completely see why, with it being pretty much flawless. There's just a few spots where the pacing is poor, like Kanai's route and the halfway point of the true route, and some of the sexual assault scenes feeling kind of unnecessary, but those are the only issues I have with this VN. The main cast is written amazingly, with Kageaki in particular being what I'd consider the absolute peak of character writing in a fictional work. The main heroines also shine through in their own routes, and the supporting cast is memorable enough to make scenes with them enjoyable. The fight scenes are sometimes a little too long, but if that's your cup of tea, then you will love the absurd levels of details. Sweet Boar is a BL visual novel developed by Nitro Plus and released on December 2018. The story is infused with horror of the most potent kind and filled to the brim with primal fear and body horror, accompanied by a brilliantly creepy soundtrack. I don't really read BL, so I have nothing of value to add here. Moving on. Gore Scream Show is a horror visual novel developed by Blacksys and released on January 2006. The description on VNDB says the following: Shino Kiyoshi returns to his hometown, Korihito City, after several years of absence to live with his mother's cousin, the free-spirited Saitama Yamiko. There, he encounters several girls that he shares a history with, and Kiyoshi's peaceful days in his hometown begin. At least until he meets a mysterious girl, alongside a disturbing figure, on his way to his first day at school, which marks the end of his peaceful days. Don't let the title of this VN trick you. This is less of a gore nakige and more of a psychological horror tale. In fact, you can basically avoid most of the horrifying scenes, as long as you don't pick the bad endings. This might be the only title on this tier that I read, and I actually love this VN, definitely in my top 10 VNs of all time. What made the story work for me is the believable down-to-earth romance with the three first heroines, as well as the excellent creepy atmosphere and the true root that was tragic and beautiful. Do yourself a favor and check this one out. Just do what I did and avoid the bad endings. Chronobox is a visual novel developed by No Brand and released on June 2017. This appears to be your middle-of-the-road VN that struggles from poor character writing and forced romance that's so generic to the point that it feels like a satire. Chronobox is a weird story where a small group of weird characters attend a school in an island with seemingly no people, while refusing to acknowledge that there's anything unusual about the situation. The story features a very interesting time loop concept like Higurashi or Ominako, where every time the day resets, one of the characters is either found dead or without a part of their body. From the CGs I've seen online, the gore in this one is very detailed, and like all the previously mentioned VNs, Chronobox features some unbearable age scenes that will make you want to pour acid on your eyes. Dead End Aegis is a visual novel developed by Metalogic, then localized by Just USA, and released on GOG Store on January 2022. The story starts with Minori as she joins the United Earth Forces to defend Earth from alien invaders as a magical girl. The big twist with this story is that for these magical girls to maintain their powers, then they need to constantly be exposed to sexual pleasure, which leads to the protagonist and her friends to constantly be assaulted by everyone on the station. And after the common route, Minori is left with two options. The first one is to stay and keep getting abused, while the other is to leave the base and risk her life. Personally, the only exposure I have to this VN is the review from the channel August Hale, and from his description this appears to be the complete disturbing package, with it having horrifying sexual content, as well as detailed gore. To be frank, I have no intention to pick this one anytime soon. Euphoria is an eroge released on June 2011, made by ClockUp, and an official English translation by Manga Gamer was released on November 2015. The story follows Keisuke Takato, who was locked in a white closed room with the 6 heroines. All of them were confused by this abnormal situation when a mysterious voice suddenly announced to them, "The game will now begin." This is probably the most infamous visual novel in the community, and it deserves the title with the absurd premise where the protagonist is called the key and the heroines as keyholes. I'll let you fill in the gaps. This title features every single degenerate fetish you can think of. I heard the story is very well written and thought-provoking, but if you ask me, I'm not picking this VN even if I get paid. At least something good came out of it, which is Sydney's review of this VN, which is just comedy god. Also, before we move on, I want you guys to remember the name of the studio who made this title, because you'll be hearing it a lot as we dive deeper. Sayonara o Oshite is a visual novel developed and published by Kraftwerk on February 2001. Being one of the founders of the so-called Denpa subgenre alongside Suino Sora, it has never had any type of re-release in the West. There exists an unofficial English translation in the wild, but it's noted for its overall poor quality, being full of grammatical errors. The story surrounds the protagonist of the novel, Hitomi Hirosuke, who is a trainee teacher who works in a certain girls' school, who struggles with hallucinations and disturbing visions around him, as well as a dream he sees every night, where an angel with the face of a girl is being violated and devoured by a tentacle monster. In the grand scheme of things, this VN is relatively tame in comparison to every title on this tier, but its contributions to the horror and Denpa subgenre can't be denied. In addition to the beautiful sunset aesthetic and the genie symbolism, while I'm not the biggest fan of text being reused across the routes, but for an old title I still believe this is a surprisingly well done VN. Maggot Bait is a visual novel developed by ClockUp and released on 2015. Then localized in English by Manga Gamer in October of 2019. The story takes place in the city of Kato, Japan, that was once a prosperous metropolitan region, but the appearance of female supernatural beings that were soon nicknamed witches led the Japanese government to quarantine the region, or more exactly discard it. Anyone can enter or leave this area if they want, but the place became completely lawless. As expected, criminals, fugitives, and illegal immigrants soon flooded the place, and as someone would expect from a place without laws, crime becomes rule. If I had to describe this VN in one sentence, then it's Euphoria but supernatural and somehow worse, with the gore being dialed to an 11, and most of the sexual stuff involving tentacles. Sydney's review about this game is somehow even funnier than the one about Euphoria. And if you want to maintain your sanity, then avoid this VN. Sadistic Blood is an erogoro visual novel, or otherwise known as erotic grotesque, developed by Black Sis and released on 2019. The story follows Yuna and Shizuha. Shizuha is a fledgling vampire, only recently turned by Yuna to save her life. The pair have been on the run from three horrendous-looking hunters for a while and think that making it to the island of Chisokura will give them some breathing room. From the same creators as Gore's Screaming Show, Sadistic Blood continues the studio's streak of having extremely freaky content that will melt your brain, and despite the short 6-hour run, this VN features a lot of bad endings. And from what I've seen researching for this title, it appears to just be a torture eroge, with the story being there just to justify the H scenes. Thankfully there's a patch out there that removes all the gore content. This VN appears to be one of the worst rated entries in this Iceberg, so I don't recommend picking it even if you can stomach it. Fraternite is yet another visual novel developed by ClockUp. The story follows the protagonist, Shirasaka Taichi, and his entire family, who moved to an entirely different town because Taichi's sister, Miu, was the victim of assault. Some days later, Miu would get approached by a girl who invites her to join her fan club, and Miu takes the offer. If you haven't realized yet, then the fan club means a sex cult. Unlike all the previous titles made by ClockUp, Fraternite has to be the most disturbing one, mainly because of how realistic and grounded the narrative is, and how it explores the manipulative nature of cults. And what makes it even more depressing is how there isn't a single happy ending. However, this title is dragged down by the absurd amount of unnecessary H scenes and the fact that one of the heroines is a literal child. Disgusting. Dansaku is a visual novel developed by Sislet and released on 2014. The story description says the following: high school student Haiki Yuki lives a happy life, eating lunch on the rooftop, visiting amusement parks, and watching the stars, all with his friends by his side. But when his good friend Alice starts to miss school, she reveals a secret that she's being stalked by a creep, and after looking more into it, Yuki comes to the realization that he's that very same stalker. After that, he snaps and begins assaulting and cutting bits of all the girls before leaving them to die, then combines their parts into a perfect form of a woman he desires. What makes Dansaku stand out is the fact that it starts off completely normal, but the more you go, the more gruesome it gets, and by the end it becomes a ridiculous gore fest that's damn near impossible to take seriously. From all the reviews I've seen, this title appears to have many interesting concepts that fall short in execution, with the story being full of plot holes and poor character motives. Nico Nico is a visual novel developed by Bug System and released on 2015. The story takes place in a world that was peaceful until superior beings suddenly appeared who one-sidedly massacred humans, and the world was swallowed into chaos. The protagonist Mia gets abducted by one of those beings, who tortures her and uses his supernatural abilities to resurrect her every time she dies. The story in this title is interesting and for the most part well paced, but there wasn't anything about it that stood out specifically. There's some neat lore and world building that doesn't get expanded on in depth. Nico Nico is a game that unfortunately falls short in its execution. While the ideas it had are appreciated, the game unfortunately falls too short to flesh out many of its concepts. Extravaganza is a visual novel developed by Black Sis and released on October 2006. The story description in VNDB talks about a little girl getting impregnated by an insect, so I won't even read it. This title has a brutal first chapter full of H scenes featuring humanoid insects, as well as detailed torture, but if you endure it, then you will have a very touching story about betrayal and growth. Also, the rest of the game is relatively tame as long as you avoid the bad endings. I found very little info about this game, but all the reviews seem to praise it for its excellent horror atmosphere and endearing characters. Gonshu Kansatsu is a visual novel developed by Sislet and released on 2012, yet another title by these guys. Well, they sure do know how to make messed up games, because this one revolves around the main heroine, Kisaragi, who sneaks into the laboratory of her teacher and discovers that he is making experiments with giant insects. The teacher surprises her and forces her to have intercourse with one of the insects. Yeah, I think I can stop here. From the limited research I did, there isn't a single review out there but that I can base my opinion off of. So I'm gonna make an exception and say that this is just another tasteless Erogoro VN made for freaks. Whatever this is called is a visual novel developed by Tinkerbell and is a remake of the original 2006 game. And yep, you guessed it, this is yet another Erogoro visual novel that features bugs. I think we might be forming a holy trinity with the 3 titles on this tier. The story starts at the office of the Demon Hunter Company, the Black Cat Brigade. A phone call informs them of a case regarding a haunted school, so they send one of their members, Takiro. However, she doesn't return after a week, which leads everyone else to head to that school in order to find Takiro. But it quickly becomes clear that something strange is going on in this seemingly peaceful school. From the review on VNDB, this game is much tamer in terms of gore, but it doubles down when it comes to the disgusting fetishes, with almost every single H scene having scat in it. While researching for this entry, I was shocked to find out that Just USA has actually localized this game in English. I'm genuinely wondering what they were smoking when they made this decision. We have made it to the bottom of this iceberg, and I'm sure you're dying to know what this VN is all about and why it's on the bottom of this iceberg. But what if I told you that it doesn't even exist? Yup, this is just a joke entry made by the OP, and from what I've seen, it's just a series of random words. But you know, I can't just blue ball you guys, so I will talk about the most disturbing VN I've ever had the displeasure of seeing, which is Dustmania Grotesque. This title was made by the studio Belly-sama. The story follows a female scientist that's kidnapped by her former colleague, who decides to carry out experiments related to immortality medicine on her. The overwhelming majority of content in this title is just shocking Erogoro, and the only form of creativity this VN displays is in how the protagonist is tormented. Even the screenshots for this VN are mostly tagged as brutal, and I'm too scared to even click on them. Also, the fact that this is the only VN they ever released makes the existence of Dustmania even more cursed. Well, that was the iceberg. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Researching for this iceberg was an uncomfortable nightmare, especially with entries like Fraternite and Dustmania. But if you feel like supporting me, then a like and a subscribe will go a long way in growing this channel. Also, I have some other icebergs like this one about forgotten video game sequels that you can watch. I hope you guys have a wonderful one, and until we meet again, take care.